Pavalina, welcome to Ad Issue. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
So many people scratching their heads at so many elected officials and candidates, and all they can talk about is jobs, 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 but seemingly we're not seeing the delivery that we need on this. Why?
Well, it's the political gridlock, I think. It's the toxic political environment. I think that we have plenty of good proposals out there on how to create jobs. We have had experience with creating jobs in our history, and we can look to places around the world, but it is really, I believe, the toxic political environment.
And when we look at what's different from, say, the New Deal period to now, seemingly it's that we have this huge debt, and the debt continues to grow with the growing deficits. And people are afraid that we can't go deeper into this, and they're not sure if government does go deeper into it, government has the answers anymore. So do you see this as more of a private sector solution versus the public sector?
Not necessarily. I'm glad you brought up the debt deficit issue, because this is sort of a classic example of a shock doctrine. I'm not sure if I suppose your listeners are familiar with Naomi Klein's argument that in difficult times, a lot of neoliberal and sort of policies, free market policies, are being pushed in times of crisis, but policies that don't necessarily benefit the vast majority of the people. And sometimes crises are artificially created for that purpose. And I'm afraid that the debt ceiling crisis is one of those artificial crises that has basically instilled in the public this fear that somehow we cannot do anything because we have the debt overhang. We do have a debt problem, but it's not a public debt problem. It's really a private debt problem. We have unprecedented debt-to-income ratios in the household sector, a huge debt overhang even in the firm sector. So the private sector is trying to deleverage, is trying to get rid of its debt. And the public sector is able to carry far more than the private and household sectors. And our situation today in the public sector debt is no different, not much different than that during the New Deal. It is really
the numbers are far
removing
greater.
The focus from the real problem.
It seems that it's not a debt ceiling crisis, but maybe the debt cost crisis, the fact that the interest on that debt is a bigger and bigger part of the federal budget. Isn't that crisis point?
Right. It is. Interest payments are a bigger proportion of the federal government. But let's just step back a little bit and reflect on the government's ability to pay its bills, whether that's interest, whether that's Social Security, whether that is any other government program. The government sector, at least in the United States, has what we call in economics sovereign control over its monetary system. We're not like Greece, that doesn't have an independent, their own central bank, that doesn't have ability to control its own currency. We're in a fundamentally different situation. So what essentially happens is Congress passes bills, passes programs, and then the Treasury, in coordination with the Fed, always makes good on government payments. We don't default on our debt. It has never happened in history. Any potential default would be fabricated in our context. Greece has a particular problem. States have particular problem because states don't have this financing option that the federal government does. So definitely states have got to, count the tax revenue and see if that would match the expenditures. At the federal level, we're able to sustain deficits without the possibility of default.
Phone calls for you, people who have thoughts on how to get the jobs going in this country. Pavlina Tcherneva, our guest this hour. We talk with Joe first from Franklin. Joe, good afternoon. Welcome to That Issue.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hello.
This is an idea that I dreamed up on my own here.
Okay.
But I know a lot of people that are between the ages of 62 to 65 who would like to retire. They've got the money set aside. The kids are gone, but the thing that's holding them back is the health insurance. And if we'd have maybe just like a temporary window of opportunity, say 6 months, that if you're between those ages, you could retire, go on Social Security, and go on Medicare. Now, I know it would be expensive, but hopefully it would open up a lot of jobs for people. And, would you rather pay people unemployment or pay old people to retire? And then these people would be paying into those systems. And you'd have to have something where they would have to actually retire. You just couldn't go on Medicare and keep working. Anyhow, I was just wondering what your guests would think about that.
Joe, thanks for the thoughts. Appreciate it. Pavlina?
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I agree with the general thrust of your argument that if people would like to retire, they need to have proper safety nets to feel comfortable in their retirement. And Medicare and Social Security are such key pieces of good standard of living for the retired. And just to go back to my argument, I feel that the debt and the debt ceiling and the deficit sort of phobia has been used to undermine those social safety nets. I very much advocate strengthening Social Security, strengthening Medicare, because if you look at, for example, the census poverty statistics that just came out, we have had a very rapid increase in our poverty in the last few years. We have 1 in 6 Americans that live in poverty, and the only group that hasn't seen an increase in poverty is the elderly population. And the main reason for that is because of the Social Security safety net. So this is a very good program, and we cannot allow fear-mongering about the government budget to be used to undermine these safety nets. So yes, if you would like to retire and then, in a sense, vacate a job for the unemployed, then that would be one, I would say, job opportunity out there. But right now, the unemployment problem is so extraordinary that we will need 30 million people to retire for that to happen, for us to deal with our unemployment problem. So we need other policies as well.
It leads me to the question where the private sector fits in. Joe gives the idea of the people retire, seemingly some of those are private sector jobs, that they'll be replaced by people who are younger who need jobs for the long term, as opposed to the company saying, you know what, we got rid of some of our higher paid employees and we can get by without them, so we've just cut off some of our overhead. We don't have to hire anybody else. So part of that problem or process to not be a problem would be that if they agree to retire, that the corporations have to agree to hire. And I don't know if the government wants to get into the business of telling the corporations they have to hire when others retire.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Ben. Private sector solutions are solutions for specific markets, for very specific jobs in specific industries, and it's a really bad business for us to micromanage the private sector and tell them what to do. What we can do, as from the point of view of public policy, is set up a different kind of program that will be a safety net for the unemployed while they are in unemployment, and that would be I have been advocating a direct job creation, a job guarantee, or transitional public employment program that will capture the unemployed as they run out of their unemployment insurance, and then will help them transition into private sector employment as the private sector recovers and starts demanding those workers.
Welcome.
Hello?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Oh, hi. I just was thinking about this, and I'm not sure if it would be the private sector helping the government or the government helping the private sector, but if there were a way to do some sort of voluntary basis, like nationwide assessment to see who's got what skills, what jobs are located where, and maybe get the welders relocated over there, the paper people over there, the construction people doing something, and offer, hey, if this is interstate or across town or another community, some sort of get the people to where the jobs are that they have those skills for, and then, maybe apprenticeships or something for people who are also interested in those type of businesses, but then people getting to start their own businesses too, just kind of a national assessment of some sort to see who's got what skills where and what would be needed. There are plenty of people hiring looking for specific skills. And, it crosses a couple of comfort issues to demand that information of people. So it'd have to be on a voluntary basis. But, it'd be something to look at versus just spending money going in circles.
Kimberly, I appreciate the call from Appleton. Pavlina, the idea that we should have a national assessment, see where the talents are and the needs are, and get them closer together, is that where the problem lies to you?
Well, I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure it's going to solve the problem, but I think it's a good idea because it will give us valuable information if we are going to come up with a program that targets jobs to the individual people with their skills. So let me give you an example. I've studied a program in Argentina, actually, that was implemented during their severe crisis in early 2000s. And what the government did is they actually set up a database where they tracked everybody who showed up at those public employment projects, because the government essentially set up a New Deal type of program. So everybody who showed up for employment, their experience was recorded in a database with their specific skills, with whatever projects that they have worked, and as they transitioned later to private sector employment, we had much better matching between workers and employers. And what's the beauty of this project, in my opinion, is as opposed to packing up families and shipping them off to, let's say, Montana, where there are more jobs than in other places, instead they created jobs in the very communities in the public sector that fit, in a sense, the people and the skills. And then they helped them transition to, if it was more desirable employment in the private sector. So there was definite element of this matching, skill matching. But in our current environment, there are job creators, but they're just not enough. We have 25 million people that are unemployed and underemployed. So even if we accelerated our job matching efforts, it's just not going to solve the very big unemployment problem that we have.
Other people want to share their ideas. Taylor next in Rushford, Minnesota. Taylor, welcome to At Issue this afternoon.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. One thing I just wanted to say is I come from a small organic family farm, and I know the agriculture industry is full of immigrant workers, and I know there are a lot of undocumented illegal immigrant workers in the industry too. And one thing I would like to say is that we would definitely love to hire American workers to help us with harvest, planting, all year round, to do jobs that anybody could do, no master's degree, no college education, and we'd gladly pay them, $7 to $10 an hour. But the Americans think they're worth so much more. We've devalued the work in this country, and we pay these Mexicans, $7 to $10, and they'll work 14, 16, 18 hours a day.
Taylor, I'm going to leave it there so you can get a comment because we need to do some other work here. Pavlina, the idea that $10 an hour just isn't enough for most?
Well, I think there's probably an element of truth in what your caller is saying. But again, I look at it really from the macro perspective, the big picture. If tomorrow we announced $8 jobs for anybody ready, willing, and able to work, how many people will show up for work? And I suspect that there are a lot of Americans, hardworking Americans that are trying to make ends meet, that have been looking for weeks on end, and they can't even find part-time employment. So I suspect that if you provide a base wage, living wage job, quite a few will show up. So, yeah, the caller has had a particular experience, and maybe he has had difficulty attracting workers. If
you need money, $10 an hour will help. If you need a living wage, $10 an hour is not it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We talk. Pavlina Tcherneva is at the Franklin and Marshall College in the Department of Economics and a research scholar at the Levy Economics Institute and Center for Full Employment and Price Stability. Pavlina, again, I appreciate your time today. I'm glad you're here to talk about this. It seems that the economy is ripe to pick up. The cost of money is cheap. Private corporations seemingly have a lot of money, some of them. The price of land is cheap. There's lots of labor available. Why hasn't this economy taken off like a rocket with all those pieces in place?
Because people are worried and are afraid. It's really expectations that drive the entire macroeconomy. So yes, there are plenty of firms that probably can use a few extra hands. There's plenty of idle capacity and many, many unemployed people and many things to do. So we just need to put them together. So we need a coordinating mechanism, if you will, to put those things together. You've been asking the question, is this a private-driven solution or is it a public-driven solution? And it seems to me that it's both. The answer probably is both. So I'm very interested in your callers' comments and feedback. But you can imagine a policy where the public sector sort of cranks up the stimulus and says, suppose we will give you a stimulus to pay for the wage bill of a worker that you may need, or suppose that we hire the unemployed for massive infrastructure projects. So you can have a public solution through the conventional infrastructure investment and a private solution where your organic farmer, social entrepreneur, or your NGO creates jobs in the community and soaks up the unemployed. So it could be both.
Let's hear some from more of our callers. We'll go to Mike next in Oconto. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Ben. This is the gospel here. Basically, the problem with job creation is petty government regulation. You just mentioned money being cheap. It is cheap, but it's impossible to get because our government's gotten in the way of getting a loan now as a business. Another issue is over-regulation, where you've got taxation on gasoline. That affects salespeople going out making efforts to sell a product which produces more jobs. We've also gotten rid of the ability to make direct calls on people, and it's a government issue, and it's also an overall dislike that people have on the efforts of a company to market or make a sales effort. And so I think it's a combination of government regulation and overall attitudes of the people.
Mike, I appreciate the call and the comments. Pavalina, let's run the phones for a bit. I got a bunch of people want to talk to you, and I'll let you jump in here in a couple of minutes. Lauren in Delavan next. Hi, Lauren. Lauren? Lauren, you're going to have to call me back because I cannot hear you. Dolores in Kenosha, we'll try you next. Hi, Dolores.
Hello. This is a great program. I have a question I've always thought about. I've worked as a nurse for many years, and we get brand new nurses out of school, and we spend a good deal of time training them in-house, nurse to nurse, and I wonder if the companies that are saying, we have all these job openings and we can't hire people, are they willing to train these people? People who, and we're talking about people who've maybe been out of work for a year and worked, in different industries, but are not familiar with the kind of equipment they have. Are they willing to train them, and what will it take for them to do it, or do they expect the tech schools who've had their funding cut to buy all this expensive equipment and train all these people for things they may never come up against?
Dolores, good question. Appreciate the call today. Pavalina?
Yeah, these are very good comments. It alludes back to the question that, number one, training alone doesn't solve the unemployment problem. We just don't have the volume of jobs. But a bigger question I think Dolores is asking is what commitment do we have to those individuals who have put themselves through school, have gone and got training and worked hard and still cannot find employment. So we as a community have educated many people who then move on to the private sector and contribute with their skill, etc. And I guess Dolores is asking, do the private sector has a responsibility to hire them? And it's a very difficult thing to do, to make a firm hire somebody when they're doing their cost-benefit analysis. So in that respect, I think, again, we as a community have a responsibility not to leave our precious human resources idle. Training alone is not enough. We have to find a good use for their skill.
Lauren and Delavan calling back, so we'll get to Lauren. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, thanks a lot, Ben, for taking my call. Again, such a great show.
Thank you.
I think one of the ways that you could really help out is to simply declare a tax holiday for all manufacturers to hire new workers. That would change the calculus of wanting to move jobs overseas because the tax decrease would offset the transportation costs to bring the ship the products over from Asia, let's say, to the United States. That would encourage new businesses from overseas to set up shops in the United States, hiring workers. I think the way forward is simply the government to get out of the way and let the market do its thing. And thanks a lot, Ben, and I'll take my comments off the air.
Lauren, thanks very much. Appreciate you calling back. Pavlina.
So I personally favor a payroll tax holiday. I think this is a highly regressive tax both for households and for employers. So absolutely, give them the payroll tax holiday. It will reduce their cost of employment. It's a very good idea. On the other hand, as a matter of principle, I don't agree with the comments a couple of your callers have made that government has been the problem, because we have had 3 decades of deregulation, and we have really dismantled a lot of the important regulations we have had that contributed to the crisis. Now, government, doesn't do things well in all aspects and is sometimes a problem. However, deregulation it's in itself is really not a solution to the unemployment problem. The market on its own does not solve the unemployment problem. It is a sort of a feature of the business cycle to have unemployment, and we have to have some safety net, some policy that will address this irrespective of the business cycle. It doesn't matter if we're in a recession or if we're in an expansion. A person who wants to work, who cannot find employment, has got to be provided that opportunity. And the market has its own logic, the way it moves, and hiring every single last person is not always the way it functions. So I think there is definite important role for government here to participate in this process.
Again, thanks a lot, Lauren. Tom and Mequon, we welcome you next. Hi, Tom.
Hi. I agree with what your guest speaker is just saying. I would like to add, too, that I think really a major problem has come about in the last 20 or 30 years in the deregulation of tariffs that this country used to have. And I think it should go back to at least an even-Steven system where, like, say, Japan or China has a 20% tariff on anything that we sell them. It automatically should be on the same product that they bring in here automatically. And I also think that there's a lot of tax policies that are in place where our government actually pays businesses to leave here, to move their equipment, to actually ship it overseas. I mean, how can that even be moral or legal or right? But it happens. That's going to stop now.
Tom, I'm going to stop you there because you've got plenty on the table. I've got lots of calls, and I want to hear what Pavlina has to say about the even-Steven program of tariffs.
If you could enforce it, that's what's difficult.
If you could enforce it, would it actually be the answer you want?
I wouldn't necessarily do that, force other countries to, have a reciprocal sort of purchasing of our goods. I think that the tax issue that he's raising is probably more to the point. There are so many incentives actually to outsource jobs abroad, and so a good overhaul of that tax code will be a very good first step.
We'll go back to the comment about the payroll tax holiday concept. Lauren was calling in just to ask you. It seems like any time you give someone a tax break in this country and it has a sunset, when the sun begins to set, people scream like crazy. It's a tax hike when you want to put it back to where it was before you had the tax break. And the government seemingly can't afford the tax cuts to not sunset, and that's part of the problem we have had in the last 5 years in this country in terms of the debt and deficit growth. So how do you put that forward and say, okay, we'll give you the holiday, but only for a certain amount of time, and then you have to accept that it's going to go away again? Well,
with respect to payroll taxes, I think they are highly regressive, and I think that I'm okay with just permanent suspension. Of course, you have the bigger issue you're raising. It could be just any other tax that will expire, and then people will feel it as a tax hike. Now, and I want to go back to my original argument that at the federal level, tax collections are not, raising taxes, especially in a downturn, are not what's going to solve the deficit or reduce the deficit. Mm-hmm. If that's the only way to reduce the deficit is to grow the economy. But again, I want to emphasize, in and of itself, the deficit should not be a policy objective. We're subjecting the real economy, we're subjecting our well-being to some arbitrary number over which we have no control as policymakers, or rather, I should say, little control. So people really have to stop and think a little bit about that we are subjecting our entire economic policy to solving some accounting number deficit, which the government is able to sustain without a solvency problem.
Well, we are probably in the year 2012, but for my grandchildren who aren't here yet, and yours perhaps, in the year 2052 or 82, these kids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids are going to wonder, why didn't they take better economic care of this country, aren't they? If we don't do what you're talking about.
The issue will not be the debt for them, because whatever the government debt is out there, it sits in somebody's retirement portfolio and some school endowment. So the debt will be an asset. What our grandchildren will be saying is, why didn't they rebuild the country? Why didn't they put green infrastructure? Why didn't they create jobs for grandma and grandpa so that they can, or strengthen their Social Security? So absolutely, we have serious problems, but they're real rather than having to do with the debt per se.
Okay, I want to go back to the phones. Jake waiting in Milwaukee. Hello, Jake.
Hello. Just a couple of quick things. The first thing is that people always say that we got out of our depression by World War II. Well, we got out of our depression by World War II, but that's because the United States spent massive amounts of money to do it. So I don't see why we would need a world war to do that now. And we had an even bigger debt back then. Second point is, government regulations do create jobs and industries. In fact, after the Clean Water Act was passed, we have so many environmental service organizations that take away hazardous wastes and other things that, if you're left in the environment, would just kill things. Like, for instance, PCBs, stuff like that, which destroy eggs and other things, are all due to being out of the environment because of these environmental regulations from the Clean Air Act. For companies like Waste Management, Veolia, Safe Harbors, all those companies make your environment cleaner because the government forces corporations to actually clean up their mess instead of dumping it out.
Jake, I appreciate the call from Milwaukee. Pavlina, the idea that regulation creates jobs, so we should have more regulation?
I absolutely agree. I think there are good regulations. There are regulations that create a safer, healthier world for all of us, and that they actually spawn new industries. I mean, I see this with the geothermal and investments and subsidies here in New York and state of New Jersey. I mean, there are, it's very little in this crisis. We need more jobs, but I do see that these are job-creating initiatives. And I think your caller is absolutely right. There is a way for us to spend money wisely for civilian purposes. We don't need a war to mobilize massive amounts of government spending to put every person to work.
Pavlina, I'm going to leave it right there. Jake, one more call, Pavlina, and we'll go to Green Bay for Nick's call. Hello, Nick.
Hi, I'm kind of frustrated with hearing how many jobs there aren't out there, because my company's begging for people, and we'll have 20 people go through the training class, and maybe we'll get 2 people that will actually work for us.
What kind of industry, Nick?
I'm doing medical transportation. I mean, this makes me mad because I didn't get this, but they're even offering a $300 bonus to work here for 6 months. And people just don't show up for work. They just decide the job's not for them, and they just never show up again.
Is it real hard work? Is it low-paying work? Why doesn't somebody want to do it?
Starting wage is $8 an hour, so it's a lower-paying job, but after a year you get kicked up, and every year you get a raise. So there's incentive to work here, and I was told by my boss, he's like, since we don't have enough drivers, he's like, all the overtime you want. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Nick, appreciate the call and the story. Thank you very much. Pavlina, the idea there that we talked about, that you started $8 an hour, you have to start somewhere, and Nick's saying people don't want that pay, so they won't work there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I am certain that there are others who are experiencing the same problem, and these will be localized problems that are just as important to solve for the employer as they are for the unemployed that are looking en masse, and they've been looking for weeks and weeks on end. You're going to come up with some policy that both employs people and helps them transition to the appropriate employment and fill those vacancies as well.
Pavlina, appreciate the time. Pavlina Tcherneva is an assistant professor of economics at Franklin and Marshall College, and glad to talk with her. We'll talk with her another day.